Hello everyone, this is Tom Uren. I'm here with the Grugq for another Between Two Nerds discussion. G'day Grugq, how are you?
G'day Tom, fine, and yourself?
I'm well. This week's edition is brought to you by Thinkst, makers of all sorts of different canary tokens that tip you off if your network's being pillaged. First of all, Grugq, I hear you've got some good news.
Yes, I've passed my upgrade, my upgrade visa, so I'm now officially a PhD candidate.
So you're a doctor in waiting.
Yes, it's...
Well, congratulations. And now you sent me this article from a magazine called Jamestown. It is by a Taiwanese bloke, Sunny Chung, and it's titled Cyber Lessons from Russia's War in Ukraine. And Sunny, he's taken a deep dive into mainland Chinese analysts and what they've been writing about, their conclusions about Russia's use of cyber forces in the war there. And he says they've followed it closely and they've drawn a series of lessons. And these analysts, they've published in papers or in places like institutional journals of the People's Liberation Army, military conference proceedings, state-backed magazines, academic quarterlies, and the PLA Daily. So there's a range of expertise, a range of closeness to the army and presumably, or the Chinese military, and presumably some are closer and some are further away from actual cyber practitioners. So it's a mixed bag, I guess.
Right.
But it is interesting. So we're just going to pick out some things and talk about them.
What I personally find interesting is this is, in a way, very much adjacent to the topic of my PhD dissertation, which is looking at, to some degree, it's looking at how the West analyzed and responded to these same events. So I'm quite fascinated to see how a completely different culture has looked at the same things and how they've drawn lessons and what they've learned. And the thing that stood out to me immediately from the beginning was, so the base assumption for both Western analysis and Chinese analysis is that Russian cyber failed. It was not a decisive, critical, and war-winning part of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. And so all of this analysis... True. This is absolutely true. You can't argue with that.
Yep.
But all of the analysis is trying to figure out, why did Russia fail? Like, why did Russia... And not the invasion, but just the cyber part. Why did Russia's cyber fail? And I would argue that that's a very faulty assumption.
Right, yeah. So we've spoken about it many times. I'll just read first this little part from the very first paragraph in the piece, which is that the writings I was speaking about in all those different publications are often strikingly critical about Russia's failings. So you're right. That's exactly what he's saying, that the Chinese analyst thinks they totally failed. We've spoken about it many times. If I was to sum up all the things that you've said, it's that Russia had a chance, they had a plan, cyber was a key element in that plan, and at the very beginning, all the cyber operations they conducted actually came off. They were executed successfully. The overall plan failed. They didn't immediately overrun Ukraine, but the cyber elements, you could see a theory of victory, how they would contribute to that overall plan. Right. And so it's a failure, but it doesn't seem like it was a cyber failure.
Right. That's exactly how I would characterize it, is that the cyber succeeded in what it was meant to succeed in. I think they targeted the wrong things, but that's a failure in the planning stage, not in the execution stage. And all of that planning was done at a higher level than the cyber units. That was the state plan of how they were going to do this. And then, like, the actual execution followed a theory of victory that was wrong. Therefore, any of the components, no matter how well executed or successful they were, could not contribute to victory because it was not going to be a victory. right? Like
Yeah,
they're just the wrong elements to do that.
Yeah.
But they were well done for the elements that they were.
Yeah. So there's a subheading here: Russia's cyber failures are institutional. So they've accepted that they failed, and this talks about the reasons that some Chinese analysts have come up with. They've described Russia's cyber prowess as something of a myth. A prominent Russia hand pointed out Russia lacked a unified cyber command. Its security services carried traditional organizational structures and strategic cultures ill-suited to cyber operations. Its operators were rooted in Soviet-era signals intelligence habits, and the state leaned on a private sector that values commercial interest over national duty. Researchers at Nanjing University portrayed the strategic culture of Russia's cyber warfare ecosystem as one that was too invested in a view of Russia as a great power and that worshipped force. Well, let's tackle whether Russia's cyber prowess is a myth or not.
I would say I don't think you could call it a myth, right? Like, I think they have demonstrated capability. Come on, they knocked out the Polish power supply at all those stations in a month, like on a short notice. Like, that's
but I think
impressive.
They failed to knock them out, though, didn't they? Wasn't it that they tried and failed?
They took out a few of them, I thought.
They did something, but it wasn't. You wouldn't call that a success. But
no,
I mean,
no, but like,
to me, the problem is,
I think it was, if you consider the timescale that it was done in, because it was so rushed. So you have to say, like, here's a bunch of guys who obviously need to get out before the Christmas break kicks off, and they still haven't met their quota for the year, and so they're desperately trying to do something. They manage to pull off something that gets a lot of media attention and makes Russia look big and scary. I would say, like, it's not a total failure. Like, I think you could spin that as a success if that was your operation, right? Like, you could find a way to read that as like a big win. Not that it necessarily was. Absolutely agreed. But I think you could spin that. There's enough elements there that you could tell a good narrative.
I mean, I think if I were to step back and look at the war in Ukraine writ large, I would say that their cyber forces have probably done as well as any element, or better than many elements of the conventional military. Right. So
absolutely.
It sort of depends what you think of as the myth to begin with in the beginning.
Right.
I would not score them as a failure, I guess. Sort of looking back on what I would have thought you could achieve beforehand.
Right. So I mean, to build on that, I'm not sure that someone could have done better. Right. Like, I don't think there's a lot of headroom above where they are that could be occupied by someone else. Like, I'm not saying that there aren't people who could have done a better job of whatever cyber stuff. Absolutely. But I don't think that would have moved the needle on the actual invasion at all. I think one of the other things that they're missing is they're so focused on effects that they've missed out on the fact that Russia is lacking in a lot of areas. For example, it doesn't have enough spy satellites. And Ukraine has got, like, over the winter, there's like 80 to 90% cloud cover on a daily basis. So spy satellites aren't even that good for battle damage assessment. And so cyber has stepped up and provided capabilities and coverage in areas that the military is lacking. So I would say that saying it's a myth is to miss the way that it's being very, very useful and is enabling other things. So to sort of dismiss it as being like, well, they're not taking out the electrical grid. Like, no, they don't have to. Instead, they help the Shaheds target areas that have just been fixed up by the repair crews. Like, that's one of the things they're doing, is they're looking at, like, where the repair crews go, and they wait until they finish, and then they hit them again, right? Like, that is a useful capability to have as a military. It's important to have that. And I don't think you can just dismiss it as like, oh, cyber isn't, like, it's not destroying the electrical grids like we thought it would.
Yep. So partly they point to lack of a unified command structure and traditional organizational structures and strategic cultures ill-suited to cyber operations. So we've spoken a couple of times about how the GRU, one of their units, got into cyber, and it seemed like it was just a manager said, I'll hire this person, and got them to do essentially random cyber operations. So it seems like a valid criticism, given that we've said that the cyber campaign at the beginning of the war was well executed, it also seems irrelevant, right? It seemed like at least some of the strategic cultures are not really suited for anything except for enriching the managers of those units, right?
Right.
But
which is a success on its own right, if you think about it. I mean, how many people are getting rich from Cyber Command, right? Like that's
that's right. Yeah. It depends on your point of view, of course. Right. So
right. I was just going to say, they're not wrong, but I don't think it's an unnecessary assessment. It's saying like as an analogy, if someone's playing there's two teams playing a football match, and one of them, like the striker scores a goal, but they still lose. If you then come out and say like, well, their uniform is quite garish, and they've been using these pink football shoes, which clashes and maybe causes eye strain or something. If they were using white or black like regular players, that would be like, those can be accurate statements, but they are not relevant to the actual performance, right? Like
so I think this is an interesting lens for. I don't know what the Chinese military organizational structure is, but it seems like if you're an analyst and you want to, or you think a unified cyber command is important, you would put that down as a reason that Russia failed.
They have one now, right? So they have one now, which I think exactly as you're saying. No, China does.
Right.
So I think that if you're a smart analyst, you would say that these other people have been very bad at doing a thing, because they do not have the same brilliant structure that we have implemented. They have not seen the light as we have, and they lack a deep culture that goes back thousands of years of strategy and blah blah blah. Like, I'm pretty sure that that's what you would find. Like, you find what you're looking for, right?
I mean, it goes on to say the subtext for a PLA audience is unmistakable. Capability is worthless without unified command and civil military fusion. So that's a Chinese term for close integration with private sector, I guess.
Mm-hmm. You mean a public-private partnership?
A minority of Chinese analysts have voiced skepticism about whether cyber operations can be a decisive factor in a conflict. So I think we've spoken a few times about how it's unlikely to be decisive. In fact, the cyber people I know who are in offensive cyber in Australia are like, it's unlikely to be decisive. It's exactly what that paper I spoke about at NATO said. That's one of the weaknesses, unlikely to be decisive. They obviously haven't read that paper.
Yeah. So not that it's not pushback, it's just contributing to that point is, I don't think that there's any domain in warfare that is decisive these days. Like, it's all about this like totality of like all forces put together. Like, you need economic pressures, you need military pressures in like the sea, the land, the air, in space if you can do it, in cyber if you can do it, and you need coalitions built up to help support you. Like, all of these things are important, and nothing is going to be decisive anymore because the armies are just too big and states are too powerful for that sort of thing. That's my takeaway.
One thing that the National Internet Emergency Response Centre, so they don't sound very, very close to the military, invoked a trilemma, the argument that a cyber operation cannot be fast, intense, and controllable at the same time.
The trilemma is from Machmeyer, who wrote a paper about this, and he's put forward very much this idea that like the reason that cyber underwhelms and underperforms is that there's this trilemma where it can't be all of these things at once. Like, you have to pick two, kind of thing. I have looked at that, and one of the things I would say is that it doesn't really hold up during wartime, because some of the things that provide pressures on these, like to be fast, you have to do whatever. They're political things, right? Like, if you're fast, then you're going to be attributed, and that's a problem. So you have to be like less fast, you can take more time and not get attributed. And then if you're going to be intense, then like it can escalate, whatever. Like, there's all of these things that are actually political constraints, not cyber constraints.
Right.
Like, they're part of the political environment, not part of the cyber environment. And so I don't think it holds up particularly well as an explanatory framework for the performance of cyber during wartime. Like, it's very good elsewhere.
I was reading intense as impactful, and so fast, impactful, and controllable. I would. Do I agree with that? I think that the more impact you want to have, usually the longer it takes you to get your ducks in a row. But
my feeling is that these are project management problems,
right.
not cyber problems.
Right.
Like, you just need to decide, like, are we going to ship what we have right now, or are we going to push for feature completeness and then ship it?
Right.
Which would be like the slightly more, or like the spend more time doing preparation sort of thing. And
right. So I guess in that view, something like Stuxnet would have taken a long time. It had some degree of impact, but they spent quite a long time trying to make sure that it didn't escape and do collateral damage. And you can imagine that the exact same people in an existential fight would go, we need to have the impact and we need to have it now. Let's not worry about collateral damage.
Well,
because we have to, right?
Right, and that's literally what's happened with Russia, where there's been several papers that have come up and be like, it's really weird how Russia started using very simple malware to do all their wiping. They used to have this very complicated stuff, and now they're just using RM minus RF/* effectively. Right. I wonder why that is, and it's like, well, it's because what possible reason could they have for switching to something fast, cheap, and out of control?
Right, whereas before, when they wanted to be proportionate, they'd go RM minus RF/docs.
Right,
documents.
Right. They'd be very. They were, like they took their time and they crafted it and they wanted to be like clever and all this stuff, and now it's just they want it to be done. So, like, I don't think it's completely wrong, but I don't think that the trilemma has a lot of explanatory power during conflict.
Now, there's a section on cyber campaigns against command nodes and civilian will most effective. And so they're talking about...
What has Will ever done to anyone? He's a nice guy.
The consensus among Chinese experts is that contemporary and future conflicts will begin with the targeting of an adversary's critical information infrastructure. So that's not necessarily water, I guess.
Yeah, but that's a very, very big target. That's Facebook. TikTok is easy for them. Like, it's Facebook. I mean, how are they going to go
American TikTok?
I think this is sort of like easier said than done, right? If you go like, first we need to take out Facebook and Google and ChatGPT and Claude and CNN and BBC and I don't know. I think it's a very, very big target to go after information infrastructure because it's so fragmented and diverse these days.
Right. They go a bit further and say the PLA authors, so presumably close to the military, argue that cyber attacks on infrastructure are most potent not as a single knockout blow, but as a sustained surgical campaign against an adversary's command nodes and civilian will. I mean, that sort of seems in a way self-evident. Like, you're better off knocking out the enemy's command and control for months than you are for days. Like, that would be better.
Like, if I turn off your radio once, that's fine. But if I can keep it off for a long time, that's useful. I think that's what they're getting at.
But again, it seems like, well, yeah, sure, that's much better. But how likely are you to achieve that?
This is exactly what I was thinking. It's if you remember, this is really way back, but there was an election in Myanmar, and the entire country was knocked off the internet for like 5 days by a DDoS.
Right.
And Myanmar in like 2010 was not like an internet powerhouse. This was not a top technology center. And yet, even so, with like the largest botnet available from the Russians, they couldn't do 7 days. Like, they could manage 5. I guess what I'm getting at is, if even 16 years ago, or whenever it was, Myanmar could defend themselves against like the best that was available at the time.
Right.
What could you possibly do that would be sustained for months in cyber? It just, it doesn't seem credible to me.
So it seems like one of the lessons that the Chinese analysts have taken is that, yeah, we should protect our critical information infrastructure better, which seems like a lesson that every country probably should be taken, but mostly people don't want to put the effort in. So, yeah,
So
what are you going to do?
I am going to push back on this because, in my opinion, I think it's overrated.
The protection?
I think everyone's like, we need to be better protected and resilient and all that. I'm like, yeah, sure, absolutely. But if you're in a sustained war, you will get that very, very quickly.
Right.
So Albania, for example, when they first got hit, they were, freaking out. They invoked Article 4. They were, absolutely, they started prosecuting people and all this stuff. These days, a few years later, they're holding conferences on how to defend against and how to respond. They're invested heavily. All of this, they've turned it around completely.
Right.
Ukraine learned how to do it. Russia learned how to do it in a couple of months. Like the security posture of the entire country improved from the start of the war until June. In that period of time, like the entire country got more secure.
Right.
They started doing all this stuff. So my feeling is that, yes, you do want to be secure going in. That would be great. But it's going to be very, very hard to do beforehand. Like you need to convince people to spend money on something that might happen. If you have a thing that does happen, people will spend the money because they'll see the need for it. And so, I'm not that worried about it. Like I'd say it's just, you'll figure it out. Like,
yep,
it's fine.
Yep.
I'm not saying we won't get our hair mussed.
So I was just trying to think of a good analogy. I guess it's totally unlike nuclear war, where just it happening once is a really bad day. You can have a cyber disaster and you can be back at home having dinner. Life goes on, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, even these sort of these worst case scenarios that they come up with is what if the electricity goes out? It's like, oh no, how would anyone ever live without electricity? That's never been done, right? It's it's not pleasant, it's not fun, but it's also not the end of the world. It's a thing that you deal with and then you go on with your life. I have been through power outages frequently in this country. I was in the US as well. I suspect that you too have survived a power outage without suffering irreparable harm.
I mean, the hardest thing is finding where the candles are kept nowadays. So Chinese experts see self-reliance as the only solution. So in the context of global competition or great power competition, it seems like a particularly bad idea to rely on your potential adversary or enemy. Like that, I agree. That does seem like a bad idea. Self-reliance seems like a precondition for being better off, not a solution in and of itself, because you can rely on your own services and they can be crappy and terrible. I guess in your example, if you start to get attacked a lot and things go bad, you're then motivated to fix it. And when you control everything yourself, you can fix it yourself.
I mean, there's a speed issue there that's sort of important to get at, which is that if, for example, you're using routers made in the US and then the US really goes against you and now you cannot use those routers, they're just absolutely bricked, they can't be repaired. That's a problem because you have to stand up a router company from scratch, figure it out, start building and all that stuff.
Yep.
So you don't want to spend that time after you need it. That's very much a thing you want to do beforehand. Fine. But I think it's possibly fair to say that if you're using US routers and you get absolutely hammered, and you might then be able to switch over to European routers as a stopgap or something I think that you don't necessarily need to be self-reliant, but you need a network of allies that is internally self-reliant.
Right. Self-reliance can be one element of a plan, but it doesn't have to be the only element, maybe.
Right.
So one of the interesting things is that they do directly talk about incidents that we've talked about, significant incidents. So they mentioned at the beginning of the Russian invasion, the disruption of Viasat and the broadband provider Trialan, which actually doesn't get mentioned that often in Western press, because I think at the time it slipped under the radar.
Right.
So that kind of indicates that they're doing their homework, I suppose.
Right.
And then they also go on to discuss US Operation Absolute Resolve, which is the one that basically kidnapped Venezuela's President Maduro out of Caracas.
Right.
Their brief description is, this involved the US mapping the Venezuelan critical infrastructure network, cataloging its vulnerabilities, and exploiting flaws in industrial software by pre-implanting Trojans to interfere with Caracas's power grid, hijack the national telecom provider's core routers, poison its domain name servers, and feed falsified radar data to its command system. I'm not sure. I've not heard that claim before. It sort of seems like it makes sense, but also I've not seen it before.
Yeah, it also seems like one of these things is not like the others. It's like we interfered with like core military systems, and we also poisoned their DNS.
Yeah.
But I feel like maybe Russia versus Ukraine and the US versus Venezuela, like they're not equal case studies to look at.
Yeah.
The Russia-Ukraine one seems sort of not necessarily evenly matched, but much closer to an evenly matched sort of competition, right?
It seems like, I mean, it's definitely an incident. The Venezuela incident is one that you would have to look at and try and understand what went on. But it's like it's it's interesting to see their technique, and there's something to aim for. But it's hard to know what lessons to take out of that.
Right. It feels kind of like watching the World's Strongest Man competition and being like, when I pick up a 600-pound stone, that's how I need to put my hands. Better.
That's the kind of command structure I need.
Thanks a lot, Tom.
Thanks, Grugq.